Welcome to the Raised Crossing Design course. My name's Ken Beer. For those I don't know, there's my contact details on the screen. And I have run the Raised Crossing course with some of you, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But some people are back here for the details. But my contact details are there. So if you want to follow up on anything, please get in contact. If we jump to the next slide, we're really excited to have Jonathan Gordon as our lead presenter in this course. And the reason we got Jonathan in he is right in the depths of detailed design, geometric design, drainage, and all of those pavement things and those really in-depth design things that people wanted to know about. So we're excited. Jonathan will be leading you through the course. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Real pleasure to be here.
And can you give us a little bit more about your background?
Yes, certainly. So I've been a design engineer for around 15 years now. In the early days of my engineering career, I was actually in construction though, and sort of construction management, and found a real passion for trying to understand designs more so I could become a better construction engineer effectively. That grew quite quickly into an absolute full interest in design, and became quite nerdy about design things. And whilst I intended to always go back to construction, found myself basically a design nerd, and that's where I am right now. So I'm really pleased to be here, really excited to be presenting with Ken, who I've worked with a lot over the years, and yeah, my pleasure. So looking forward to today.
Great, thank you. Let's jump on to the next slide. I'll just talk a little bit about the admin of the course, and you can see another person on screen there. That's Marissa. Hello, Marissa.
Hi, Ken. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the course. Excited for today.
Yep. And Marissa is behind the scenes coordinating, organizing, managing, helping people out. And the training at safesystemsolutions.com.au email will go to Marissa and her team. And if you've got any issues about the admin, the logistics, trouble logging into stuff, whatever it is, pop it through to training at safesystemsolutions.com.au and they'll look after you. Now, many of you have done online courses with us, but the chat is how you speak to us, because this is a webinar version. We don't hear your dogs barking in the background, and we don't see you wandering around in your pajamas, because you do everything through the chat or the Q&A. So as we ask you questions, if you're answering them, pop them in the chat, or if you've got questions, pop them into the Q&A or the chat. And I will be monitoring that behind the scenes, answering some of them and feeding them through to Jonathan as he takes you through the course. The other thing there is the learning management system. And the learning management system is really important that you have access to. We're going to take you through that at the end. That's where we house the recording of things. We have some quizzes for you. We put lots of resources in there. It's a bit of a forum. Most of you have already got in there and said hello and logged in. But anybody who hasn't, make sure you get access to the learning management system. And of course, we give out a few prizes, and Jonathan may give you a prize if you answer a question well he likes, or if you ask a really good question, we may give out a few prizes. So get involved, get active, pop your stuff into the chat and the Q&A. Jump to the next slide, please. So we do actually set a little competency benchmark for this course. It's nothing overly onerous, but we ask you to attend the sessions, or at least watch the recording. And the quiz, we want you to get 80% pass mark. You've got 3 attempts at it. And of course, Jonathan and myself are available to have some one-on-one coaching. If you're really struggling to get it, understand a concept, you can just request that, and we'll happily have a Teams meeting with you or a phone call or whatever it is and talk you through some of that content. Let's jump to the next slide. I just wanted to give a little background to the Raised Crossing Design course. Many of you might be aware we have the Raised Crossing Principles course, and we have just fantastic presenters in that. We've got Bridget Doran, who talks about accessibility. We've got Hafez Alavi, who talks sort of strategically. And then Prue and myself get into more of the details around raised crossings. And Prue does a wonderful job in talking about where to position crossings and the advantages of some of that, and talks about some wonderful community-driven choice making around raised crossings and facilities and the like. And I get into the how you build a raised crossing, but only at a certain level. We got a lot of requests out of that course for into further detailed design level, geometrics, pavement makeup, drainage, services. How do you deal with all these? And what are the, in CAD, how do we actually really get into those details? And that's where we reached into Jonathan, who spends his life in there in MicroStation and working away, designing these and the like. So this course really digs into some of that detail, and I do want to acknowledge the people in the principles course who have set a wonderful foundation for us to be able to jump into that. So I will very much be in the background here, leaving it to Jonathan to take you through the details. I'm looking at the chat here and the Q&A, so pop anything into there. But Jonathan, what do you say? Should we jump into it? Actually, before we do,
yep. Sure.
I just want to acknowledge traditional custodians of many lands that this training is being run on, because we've got people from all across Australia and New Zealand here. So paying respects to elders past, present, emerging from all of those lands. Let's jump into some raised crossing design.
Okay, fantastic, guys. Well, like I said, I've been excited to be here with this opportunity to help share my knowledge on raised safety platforms and various versions of those. Just going to quickly run through the program for what we're going through today and in our session on Friday. So in day one, we're looking at the fundamentals of the project scoping and building an understanding of what this project may be for you. So that's project scope, and it's also about site validation. A huge portion of today will be about site validation. And what I really mean there is it's understanding what we want, the project scope, that's fine. Then actually understanding what the site needs the project to be. Does what we want work? Do we need to change what we want? And does that project grow? So that's what today really is about. Don't worry, there's lots of nerdy, awesome design details in there. So it does involve a lot of design elements, but really day two is where we jump into the more fundamental design elements. So that's looking at our drainage solutions. It's looking at the actual geometric design, fundamentals of geometric design for these projects, and also solving some of the trickier issues. We'll talk about pavement design principles, not necessarily giving you the information to design pavements, but certainly to understand the unique principles for pavement designs at these raised safety platforms, some of the key issues that might occur. And then also there is a lighting design component. With such a jam-packed program, I'll be touching on that just slightly, but we've made an offline, we'll be making an offline version available for day two. So this is really the fundamentals of designing our raised safety platform. A lot of today's course and the course on day two as well, we'll be focusing a lot on crossings. However, the principles are applicable to many different types of raised safety platforms, not just the crossings themselves. So let's jump in. So here we have a raised safety platform, and it's great. Very happy to see it there. It's a raised priority crossing for a shared use path, and it's pretty straightforward. But as we roll through, we've got our ramps and our platforms. I mean, that's fine. That's covered in the principles course that Ken has previously presented. That is available, as we discussed, online on the learning management system. So please, if you're not familiar with it, jump on and have a look at it. But that's our ramps and platform. That's a big part of the design, of course. But also we have curb extensions. And we might be wondering, well, they're good, or are they good, or why would we use them? And we'll learn a lot about that today. Then we've got our roadside paths, and you might be wondering why I'm talking about the roadside when really we want to focus on this, don't we? Well, these projects grow dramatically depending on what's happening in the roadside. So we've got our paths, and they need to still obviously connect to a crossing. And then we've got drainage solutions. And then we've got roadside grades and trees, and roadside grades. And then we've got our services. And even worse, we've got service clashes. And so what happens is these projects that seem quite simple, but it feels like it might be a little lump of asphalt on a beautiful new road or an existing site, well, they actually grow quite quickly depending on the actual site that we're applying these things to. So we'll talk a lot about that site validation, but let's just jump in and initially talk about project scoping. So this is going to be a broad level view of the potential scopes that we might have for these projects. So let's talk about budget. Obviously, that's important for many of you. You may be working at councils or in actual delivery of these projects, and understanding budget is important because it might change the ability for you to roll out several of these safety improvement projects, or you might realise that that you have a limited budget and need to prioritize. So in our budgets, just very quickly, we've got our very low budget sort of solutions. That doesn't mean they're poor operating, but something like this where you're keeping existing curb lines and existing pedestrian crossing locations, it's actually cut straight into the pavement. So the cost of this is basically the cost of saw cutting the pavement along the curb line and installing the platform itself. These styles of crossings have some challenges, and we were talking a lot about those in today and in day two. Then we've got the sort of higher quality, high performance solutions. So systems such as this, it's got brand new asphalt either side. It's actually part of a broader rehabilitation project. We've got the bike rails to enable someone to dismount should they have ridden their bike at this location, because it's a wombat crossing, not a shared priority crossing. And we've got the paths connecting at grades. This is really nice and smooth for any crossing, for anyone using the pathways and the crossing itself. We've got drainage options as well. So we've got our low budget options where here, I mean, the intent is that water just flows through the system. There's no major connections to stormwater drainage. This operates in the existing drainage environment. So it's a low cost drainage solution. And of course, here's something I love to see. We've got double side entry pits, and that's a backup pit for the catching of water at the toe of this ramp section here. And that's a higher performing system, of course. It's also higher cost. So that's just the fundamentals. As we run through the session today and on day two, I'll be presenting these summary slides. I won't necessarily run through them in detail. We generally will have covered most of the information within them, but there might be some good stuff in there as well that we didn't quite get a chance to chat through. I'll typically, except for this one, I'll be presenting them quite quickly, just so if you're rewatching the video and you have time to pause it, just have a look at it, and there might be a handy reference for you into the future. So another huge part of scoping is materials. And this is a great opportunity to jump in and talk about asphalt via a poll. In today's course, we'll be running polls and in day two. And it's a great way of getting you guys involved in a relatively quick way to share some opinions. So Ken or Marissa, if you could pop up the poll for what we believe the benefits of asphalt are for our raised safety platforms.
Okay, you should be seeing a poll pop on your screen there. Don't worry if you don't see it. It's occasionally a firewall blocks poll popping up. None of the polls you're marked on or anything like that. They're just there for a bit of interaction, get you thinking a little bit. In the background, Jonathan, we've just been covering off a few questions have come in,
Sure.
Which you'll be covering later in your content.
Okay,
so
great.
I've sort of deferred people to wait and see what you cover, and then we can have some discussions about a bit of those.
Excellent.
So looking pretty good there. We're starting to see some answers come in, and Jonathan, if you just keep occasionally sounds a little bit soft, so maybe if you just keep talking loudly to that's it. Nice.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
That's perfect. Seeing some comments come in. Top 3 benefits from the list, okay, of asphalt here. Getting lots of answers coming in. Thank you. This will be a nice little platform for you to talk from, Jonathan. Excuse the pun there. I'll give it only 5
Ramping into the puns already, Ken.
That's right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end that poll and share the results. And over to you, Jonathan, to have a look there.
Well, this sort of poll, I mean, there were no wrong answers, so there's no challenges in here. It's just good to see a bit of a mix throughout there. We've got a lot of people talking about the good durability and flexibility and cost effectiveness. In fact, it's pretty lots of people across the board seeing that they're all fairly beneficial, and that's the truth. These are the benefits of a raised safety platform. Probably the key things are that they are cost effective. I mean, it's a really common material used throughout Australia and New Zealand for our roadways. And I do like the contrast that we get. So when we're talking about our black coloured asphalt and our white line marking, that works really well. It's relatively thin layers can be constructed as well, so that can get you out of some very complex construction issues if you need to dig down a lot for other materials, etc. In terms of issues, I mean, there's not really a lot. I mean, there might be some challenges in the construction methodologies, etc., but they're all managed through typical practices. And I'd say the only real challenge is that it is a flexible pavement design. These may deform over time, so just keep that in mind for certain environments. Let's move on to concrete now, and I'll just quickly talk through some of the benefits of concrete, and then we'll jump into another poll after that. But the benefits of concrete are that it is a really strong rigid system. I mean, it works really nicely. It's able to be formed really accurately as well. So when we're building a concrete ramp as opposed to an asphalt system, we're able to really define these levels and just have them formed correctly. There are a few issues though. Sorry, it's very durable, of course, as well. So now for another opportunity to get everyone involved, to get active in today's course, let's run another poll on what we believe are some of the key issues for the use of concrete. So we have relatively high construction cost and a relatively thick construction layers. And that's what I was referring to earlier about asphalt, which can be constructed quite thin. And then we've also got material colours that may obscure line marking in there.
Okay, so that poll should have popped up on people's screen as well. And we'll give it a few seconds there. This is a good start getting people thinking already, Jonathan. I like it.
Yeah.
And we did have some questions in there around concrete, asphalt, and that's what we're covering off already here. But do put your comments in, and we like people sharing their thoughts and their ideas. Had some positive support there from Anthony on the spoon drain, really highlighting that priority at the crossing point. So we'll give it a couple more seconds just as people tick things in. And I have the advantage of being able to see live what's happening. And we'll give it a couple more seconds. And just as that happened, Michael's asking a question. Do we have a photo of a raised crossing with a median refuge? I think we do in this course.
We may have a photo. Well, definitely we'll be discussing it via some CAD images. Yeah. In fact, to be honest, almost got that in this slide right here.
I'll see if I can dig one out. All right, let's have a look at the results here. They've come in, and over to you, Jonathan, to interrogate.
Well, that's great. So we've got a sort of mixed result here. Of course, and once again, there's no wrong answers. So relatively high construction cost is coming through in the sort of mid to high importance. Relatively thick construction layers. Interesting to see that is mixed across the board, but quite a few found it sort of in the middle there. And material colours may obscure line marking, which of course might be resolved, including in situations such as what we're looking at in the image in the background here, where you've got a darker pigment, but that can be an issue. We'll talk about that very shortly. So it's good to see that there's a mix of results there. Once again, this is not a right or wrong scenario, but I would say that even things as simple as the relatively thick construction layers, which we'll be chatting a bit in day 2, that can be a challenge for sites because unlike asphalt, which may be able to be laid as thin as 30, 40 millimeters, you're typically looking at quite a deep pavement construction, which might mean that you need to reconstruct a lot more pavement for these. And I'd say that really does raise up the cost as well. Let's just talk a little bit about, this is an interesting one, isn't it, Ken? And we have talked about this before, Ken, but this is an interesting little site and it just illustrates some of the issues that you might find with the line marking being obscured. So here you can see, sure, we've got some white line marking on the quite light coloured concrete, and that might look okay right now, but when it rains, it might become slightly shiny or slightly obscured. And then what we've got, Ken, is the reverse zebra crossing. I don't quite know how to describe this one.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on it?
I've never seen it before. I took that photo. I was like, oh, okay. Now we're onto something funky. I've seen lots of different coloured treatments with the zebras on or the white lines on top, but this was one I hadn't seen. But
that's right. I think it's creative, and like I give merit to the idea of it, but I'm not quite sure that it's operating as I would have liked it to be. Particularly in the fact that perhaps a better solution may have been to make the whole area black and white stripes as per a standard zebra crossing, something like that. But it does illustrate that they've obviously seen this and had an issue and thought about ways to make this operate better. And you may still find that you've got those, the visibility of line marking may still be an issue for you. So let's move along to the next slide. I don't think we'll run a poll on this one, Ken. I might just run through some of the key issues about and benefits of pavers.
Just before you jump on there, Jonathan, Michael put a good comment in around being able to throw some colour into the concrete mix to
absolutely, yes. Yeah, and that's a fantastic comment. If I go back to just a couple of slides just to illustrate that, that's why this original system, this does work well, and it's got the pigment, it's got the charcoal colour palette in there, and that helps it stand out. So please keep that in mind. I mean, I'm not I've got nothing against a standard sort of lighter coloured concrete for various purposes, footpaths, etc. But for these types of sites where line marking is important, I'd actually be suggesting that we all strongly consider the right contrast for the line marking that's required. So now let's just, and that was a great question or great comment. Thanks for that. Let's jump in and have a quick chat about pavers as well, because they are really an option. And some of the key benefits, as you can see here, is that they're aesthetic. I mean, they work really well for your town centres, your shopping areas, etc. And it might feed into your urban design principles or whatever the town centre that you're looking at requires. And they work nicely. I like them in principle, but they've got some key issues. I'll chat about a few of those issues now, and I'll jump to the next slide to really highlight one of them for you. They are high cost. I mean, they can be very high cost. They can be required to be hand laid, and that also continues into our maintenance burden, where if one of these little pavers lifts up, then you need one the right size to replace it with. If there was any patterning, which is a bit abstract, this pattern here, but if it was very specific patterning, then you might need the right colours, etc. So they can be high cost to construct and high cost to maintain. One of the key issues, though, is what I'll chat through on this slide. And please, as a key takeaway from the discussion of pavers, this is the key point I'd like you to understand. This is a photo taken of a site in Brunswick. This was taken about 12 months after the construction of this project. And something's going on here. And I won't pose the question to you. I'm just going to highlight it. When you have a closer look here at what's going on, this line marking is already being worn away. And that's what pavers are notorious for. So if you're using pavers on perhaps your ramp sections, be aware that the line marking requirements may be obscured, but particularly for elements like a wombat crossing or something that has line marking that defines a road rule, please be aware that pavers may not be suitable. There's so many different paver types as well that whilst one may have worked somewhere else, others may not work. So it's probably the key issue, well beyond cost, is that the system may require lots of reline marking and may become a bit dysfunctional if you don't do that. Let's jump on to our final aspect of materials, and this one here is just a combinations discussion. So here we've got a great example of combinations. We've got a concrete crossing area. This has no pedestrian priority at this site. Then we've got our asphalt ramps. We've got bluestone lining the pathway and bluestone lining the ramp section. And so obviously you can use any combination that your jurisdiction may require. This is also a nice aesthetic option. And just as you can see though, which also illustrates the key issue I was discussing earlier, we've got line marking here that's quite old and it's doing fine on our asphalt. And here on our bluestone pavers, it's already wearing, so not already, but it is wearing off. And it just illustrates that key issue again for pavers and line marking not necessarily bonding well. So let's pop together our little summary. I'm just going to leave this on there while I ask you, Kev, is there any other questions at this stage?
Oh yeah, just a couple of comments there. So people, not too happy about pavers for a number of reasons. People coming off their bikes and wheelchair challenges with small pavers and these sorts of things. So
yep.
I think you've articulated that well. And that last one that you showed, just jump back a slide. Yeah, it's not a pedestrian priority crossing as such, more your threshold raised treatment. So Jonathan's just talking about the sort of materials makeup of it and the like. In our raised crossing principles course, we do delve into sort of, Prue does a really wonderful job of talking about some of those times when you'd really want to be prioritizing pedestrians and creating these facilities. So I encourage you to jump onto that course to have a bit of that discussion. Jonathan's more into how do we build them, how do we design them, how do we make those work. So back to you, Jonathan.
That's right. Yep, fantastic. Yeah, and I will be chatting about these sort of locations, but again, not necessarily the demand for why you'd make something priority or not, but I'll be talking about threshold locations and setbacks shortly. So here's our summary slide again. I'll just leave it for 2 more seconds and then we'll move along because I'm just going to do a quick run through. I mean, many of you I'd expect would understand each of the options I'm about to present to you, but let's just have a quick chat about crossings and the sort of purpose and location, just so we are getting a broader understanding of the crossings themselves. So here we've got a wombat crossing, that's the zebra marking on the raised platform. We've then got our bicycle crossing, so that's with the nice green pavement markings here and the separated bike lanes through, again on the raised platform. A shared path priority crossings, that's with the yellow markings in Australia at least. And then we've got our combined bicycle and wombat crossing. So that's a bit of a combination here. We've got our wombat separated. There's various scenarios that you'd consider an option like this. I'd suggest this is possibly a landscaping picture only, because I'm not quite sure where the bikes are going for this option, but it does illustrate the crossing style in itself. And then, of course, we've got speed cushions and other types of vertical deflection devices that are part of the raised safety platform family. We won't be focusing on speed cushions in our courses. If anyone had specific questions about these sorts of devices, hopefully throughout the course we'll have answered those just in the fundamentals of our design principles. However, if you do have your questions about options that are less focused on crossings themselves, we'll be pleased to assist you outside of this in QA. So let's jump a little bit more into crossing locations. So just going to run through some options here quickly. We have our intersections with a setback. We'll talk to you about that, and anyone who's been involved in the principles course may recall some discussion in that as well. Of course, we've got mid-block options, and then we've got these threshold treatments where the crossing is against the curb or traffic lane line of the main road here. So let's jump in and talk about threshold crossings, just to illustrate some of the key issues, but also some of the reasons why we might consider them and why they may even be beneficial for your project. So here we've got a typical threshold crossing. Again, it's not priority. If you would love it to be a wombat crossing, please feel free to just imagine the line marking here. But here what this threshold crossing is doing is, you can see it's placed along that continued line of curb. It's got a spoon drain in this situation that continues through. And this is great. It's got some of the desire lines for why you would use this sort of crossing location. But I'm just going to use a bit of animation to illustrate one of the key issues here, or just something that you may wish to consider, which is that when our vehicle driven by a crazed wombat appears at the crossing location, it may block the crossing itself. And it may cause some operational issues, just for particularly in high pedestrian demand environments, etc. So that's probably one of the key issues, is that the crossing may be blocked by approaching vehicle. That's not a road rule issue. I mean, vehicles are allowed to do this, but perhaps if this were set back by a vehicle length, then you'd have the ability to have a continued pedestrian operation behind the vehicle safely. There's a few other potential benefits of setbacks, and I'll be talking about them shortly. Let's continue on this threshold crossing location discussion and just talk about some of the benefits of them. So I touched on it then, but it really may suit constrained property lines, such as in that previous image there. And that is because it suits the desire line. So if you've got a continued path of travel here, then this location may be ideal for that. And in constrained smaller residential areas, or even in that example I just previously showed, which is in Brunswick, Victoria, it may suit the property lines being tight against the corners here. It may also simplify our drainage. So I've got no issues in having drains continue along the toe here, provided that it does flow, of course. And just a little note on some of those discussions I was erring towards. What happens if we've got our priorities? I mean, some people are concerned that whether it's a wombat or it's not a wombat, there's some key differences in the way they operate. And it's not a huge change. There are differences. I'll just quickly touch on those in terms of the Australian road rules. So if there was vehicle priority, in other words, if this wasn't a wombat crossing and it was just a standard crossing arrangement, then vehicles must give way to path users who are crossing here for every movement, rights, lefts in, all those sort of movements, except for the minor road approach. So the key issue here is, or not issue, the key operational requirement is that pedestrians need to give way to a vehicle approaching from the side road. They can then pull in here, and pedestrians need to wait till that vehicle passes, or they may choose to walk around, and that's up to them. For our path user priorities, such as the wombat we're looking at here, the operation is identical, except an approaching vehicle must give way to the pedestrian. So that's the only real key difference in Australian road rules in the way these need to operate. After the pedestrian crosses, that vehicle is able to approach the intersection, stop at the stop line, block the crossing, etc., because that's an exception for the operation of a zebra crossing at an intersection. So hopefully that's quite clear that they're similar in operation. There are some long debates that we could have on whether this should be a wombat crossing or not. I probably will leave them out until the questions were asked, and they might take up a bit too much time, so we might need to refer those later if there were questions. Let's jump into a setback arrangement now, though. So here, unlike a threshold crossing, which may have been, I mean, we've got a turn lane here, so it might not have worked out well, but a threshold crossing at the stop line location or give way location, we've got a setback here. And anyone from the principals course who's previously attended will recognise that I have stolen this slide from Ken to illustrate some issues. And that is that it enables a vehicle to store at this location in the approaching prior to the crossing itself. That has some really great operational benefits. It enables the continued flow for the crossing itself. And it also enables some time for a vehicle turning right in to have switched their attention from oncoming traffic. So this might be a right turn vehicle, for instance, and oncoming traffic, and they might be looking for the right gap to safely and at the right pace approach and turn. It gives them time to recognise the ability to stop or the need to stop from a path user. And that's very helpful for wombat crossings, etc. It's even more important, and I'd suggest for a bicycle or shared use path crossing where a vehicle may be watching the gap and a cyclist is moving along a bit faster than the average pedestrian. Giving this vehicle time to acknowledge that and stop is fantastic. And it's also obviously got the benefit that we illustrated for our threshold crossing, which is that flying cars, again, with crazed wombats at the wheel, are able to stop at the stop line and enable the continued operation. So if this were a wombat crossing in a high pedestrian demand environment, that would be a very important consideration. Can that continue to operate? So let's talk a little bit more about the setback arrangement in the details. So what sort of distances would you have here? There's some references to 7 metres, etc., but I'd suggest that you're looking at 6 metres for your standard passenger vehicle. It's about 5.4 metres long. And to the toe of the ramp would be fantastic just for the comfort and the situation. If you're really squeezed up, I mean, I'd just be happy with 6 metres clear of the crossing platform itself. I'm not suggesting you always need to squeeze things up, but certainly the principles of having a vehicle stop by the stop line without blocking the crossing is the key goal here. These have improved traffic performance, like I suggested, for those right-in movements, etc. And it's got much better crossing performance, but it's got some of those it's got safety benefits to it as well. Enables vehicles to pull up early. So why don't we do these all the time, though? I mean, they appear to be superior in their operation. The key issue is that sometimes they don't work really well for the site. In constrained property line areas, so smaller residential areas again, you might find yourself needing to dogleg paths to get to these locations. And you might then find that our desire lines are less desirable. So here we've got the green arrow saying we want a pedestrian to walk back down here and cross at this location, whereas anyone travelling from this path to this path may start to get the feeling that they'd just like to continue straight. The average crossing user may not do that, but certainly we don't want to have situations where this crossing location becomes unattractive and people decide to cross at the incorrect location. For 6 metre setbacks, might not sound like much, but for larger vehicles that you may be storing here, these could become unreasonable setbacks for that desire. So there's potentially some more other issues, and we'll discuss them later in day 1 and day 2. So I'm going to refer to another slide that is cheekily stolen from Ken's previous course, because it helps segue into another discussion I'd like to have. Here we've got multiple lanes in a single direction, and we do not like these for path priority crossing, so for any path priority crossing. And the key reason here is that this vehicle stopped here is blocking the sight distance for path users. And this vehicle approaching might not know why they're stopped, or might think that they're about to take off when they're actually still waiting for another pedestrian to cross. So that's a key safety issue. We do not want multiple lanes in the same direction. We only want a single traffic lane going through on approach to these crossings. So that then segues, like I said, into, so what do we feel about this setback then? Because what we're looking at here is a road with some old curb that's been removed, and we've put some curb extensions in to get these to get some nice sight lines, etc., for this crossing location. We've got that 6 metre setback, and a vehicle is propped here and it's doing a great job of keeping this clear. But I've got a problem with this sort of arrangement, and it's not a critical problem. It's not a game over. It's just something that we need to consider. And that is that this vehicle is in a very similar position to if this were 2 lanes in the same direction. They're stopped and propped here and maybe blocking sight distance to a pedestrian crossing for a vehicle turning in from any direction, really. And that's just something I'd like us all to consider when we're scoping up our projects is our curb extensions, for instance, the right solution for this site? And how might we look at resolving this issue for our project? And a quick example is the use of a median island. So median islands may not be ideal or even feasible for every project site where we're using a setback crossing. But if you do have the room, and in a scenario like this with this parking and traffic lanes, etc., you might actually have the room quite comfortably. Then it does help alleviate that issue. So let's just, as a quick reference, I'll just run through a couple of examples of why you might be able to fit this in your project site. So what do we want here? I mean, I could accept reducing the 5 metre rule, but in Austroad's recommendations, there is a 5 metre offset from curb to curb, and that enables a broken down vehicle to be passed by another vehicle, etc. You might have a 1.6 metre median, which gives us our desirable 1.6 metre offset for a vehicle to sight a pedestrian before they enter a crossing location here. So that gives us 11.6 metres. An example of a very, very standard carriageway would be that's two 3.5 metre lanes with 2.3 metre parking bays each side. That is both textbook and very common in an urban environment. So you could fit that in there. And if you're looking at minimum scenarios, then I'd be suggesting you'd want 1.2 metres in the median ideally. And that's because we can fit a small sign in here, sign in the middle, sign on the side, reinforces the awareness for this being a crossing that has certain requirements. And the sort of environment you might find is, again, 3.5 metre traffic lanes and 2.1 metre parking bays. Again, that's a very, very commonly used parking bay with straight out of Australian standards. So your sites may really suit a setback crossing with a median island. There's no need to make it a refuge because, I mean, you can make it wider if you'd like. It doesn't have a refuge requirement because this is a priority crossing.
So just a couple of questions on
Yeah,
that
sure.
come in. Would that be significantly increasing the cost of a project, do you think?
Well, it's a good question, and the answer is it does depend. Sorry for an ambiguous answer, but let's just jump back a slide very quickly and we'll say that in this site where you've got the sufficient width in your cross section, what we're doing is the original curb lines may be like this lighter grey option. What you'll be doing here is cutting curb out, removing existing pavement, constructing new curb returns, etc., and the asphalt itself. And whilst I'd suggest this might be a bit more expensive, but it depends what's out there. And it wouldn't be significantly more expensive to keep the existing curb or perhaps modify it at the platform itself and just build the island and two separate ramps. So there's some cost considerations. My money would be on the curb extension version being a little bit cheaper, but I don't necessarily think a median island is outrageously expensive if you have the cross-sectional width.
Yeah. There was another question.
Right?
There was another question in there around sight distance. It's when you set it back, it's hard to meet sight distance and the like. I actually encourage people to jump in to watch my session because I talk a lot about sight distances and you know, sometimes if you can't meet one sight distance, at least meeting another is good and balancing those sort of things out. So jump into the learning management system and watch that session, and then after module 2, if you've still got questions, we can chat about it. And Michael made a good point in there around sort of that offset can create a horizontal deflection for cyclists or scooter riders or the like to slow them down a bit on the approach to these crossings, which is a pretty good thing. Let's keep jumping, Jonathan.
Okay, fantastic. Great questions there. I'm really glad to see active involvement. I was wondering how involved we'd all be, and it seems like we are right there. That's fantastic. So let's have a look at this site then. And hypothetically, the road width wasn't there, and even the road reserve wasn't wide enough, and the pedestrian demand at this site meant that the risks of the issue we just discussed were manageable, and the clients accepted this arrangement of just a two-lane crossing setback. So what goes on here is that this vehicle stops and props and turns out as required, and I'm happy with that. And we've all agreed that it's safe. And then we realise that further down the road, there's a bus depot though, and that this bus depot is turning out 5 vehicles an hour, 12, why not? Let's just make it even more. But this bus depot may cause an issue for our site. And absolutely, you already know what it is. It's that when buses arrive at the intersection at the top, they then challenge the operation of this setback crossing again. So this 6 meters that I've been referring to may not be a golden rule for your site. And here, this may have some really challenging, this bus depot may challenge even the feasibility for this project, where vehicles, of course, the bus is turning in and it's actually blocking the main road here. And this bus waiting to turn out is blocking the crossing. In certain pedestrian demand environments, this might, no, actually, I'll just say that considering a bus depot, we want priority crossing here. I think that this is a feasibility issue for this exact location. You may be able to, in this circumstance, set this crossing back a little bit further to enable crossing clear of the 12.5 metre long bus that's sitting there and waiting. However, if this weren't a bus depot and it was actually a truck depot and you're running 26 metre B doubles out of it, this might be a genuine issue, and it might actually be a game over for this be a crossing site, because the desire lines for someone crossing 26 metres away may be impractical. And in that scenario, strategically, I'd be saying you might even be looking at the path on the north side, and how could we have got our pedestrians there safely to not even have this key issue in operation? Great, so let's just move along into our supporting treatments discussion. So I'm just going to really quickly touch on some of the other things that may form part of the project scope that we have. We have scenarios in which, is this part of a system? Are we putting in a raised crossing that is familiar and everyone is one of dozens in town, or is it one of only, or is it the only one in town? Is it near a regulatory speed change? Or is there some site distance issues that we couldn't quite make work for our site, but we believe the safety improvement of installing this is still a significant improvement? In that scenario, we may require supporting treatments. It could be as simple as signage, so some advanced warning signage, etc. It might be the flashing light scenarios where that greatly improves our awareness of the crossing location. And even it could be a township entry treatments. So in rural environments, this may not apply to everyone attending today who might be working in urban environments, but for anyone in the rural areas, looking at installing, say, a crossing just here, just past the speed zone change from a previous 80 kilometres per hour or even faster. Township entry treatments may be an excellent way to change the driver's awareness system. So they might have been driving in that rural environment, enjoying the scenery while safely watching the road ahead, but slightly in that not distracted, but the longer reaction time environment. These treatments are known and are proven to improve awareness. So consider threshold treatments if there's any treatments, any new raised safety crossings, etc., that are at their town limits and outside of town. So that sort of summarises the fundamentals of scope. It should hopefully have given us an understanding of the materials that we might be considering and just what we're sort of aiming for at our site. But let's take that now and let's take what we wanted and see about how to apply it to a site. And this is in the site validation section. Yes, we'll be talking about some of the peripherals of how the operation of how a raised safety platform needs to be placed, etc. But we'll also be delving into the initial parts of design requirements and what we're looking for on site and what might make our site easy to design and what might make it a bit challenging. So jumping into site validation. So just before we do, Ken, are we all happy to move on from our project scoping?
Yeah, let's keep ticking along. I'm just answering a few questions in the background here. Yeah. So keep
great.
Going.
Okay.
And we're going to, sorry, everybody, we're going to take a break about half time for a quick stretch break, fill the coffee up. So Jonathan's going to keep ticking along now.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so site validation, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about what's the actual road itself doing. That's cross-sectional features that we've discussed some of, but crossfall and parking bays, etc. It's also about the grades of the road and what's great, what are we aiming for, and what's not so good after all. Also, we're talking about the platform itself. So that's our ramps in the platform, and that's all covered in lots of detail in the preceding course, which is available on the learning management system. But also curb extensions and median lines, which we've discussed. We're talking about also roadside and the roadside features. So that's the property lines that we've introduced them, but they can cause some challenges for our projects, and also the batter slopes and other obstructions. We're talking about road users and who's on the road and how can we manage on-road cycling, etc. We're also talking about services. My bugbear of every project that I design. I'm yet to come across one where services were my best friend, but that's fine. I do like a challenge. So that services can be very challenging for our projects. So please consider them a major part of our site validation process for not just race safety platforms, but for all road projects. So why would we validate a site? I mean, what am I talking about? I'm talking about understanding what our project needs for this particular site early as possible so that we can get better solutions rolling and better budgets for our projects and just fewer surprises when we're out there building them, and fewer surprises for anyone in delivery, as we know, means fewer variations. So that builds back into the budgets, etc. Let's jump in. Cross sections. So let's talk about the cross section of a road. I'm going to be using this slide quite a bit as we roll through today's course. Just going to quickly introduce what we're looking at so we're familiar with it. We've got some blue lines on the outside. That's our property boundaries on each side here. We've got some batter slopes. We've got a footpath here, some sort of roadside nature strip areas. Then we've got our curbed carriageway. Let's pretend this is an existing carriageway. It's got some parking bays. It's got traffic lanes in the middle and parking bay on the other side. It's got some different slopes here. So we might have, ideally this might, in a new constructed road, might have 3% perfect crossfall all the way across. In many, many rural environments, more constrained urban environments, you might find different crossfalls in your parking bays. Then we've got the same sort of process over the other side of the nature strip and our shared use parts. So let's kick off by talking about parking, just in a little bit of detail. I might just jump in and talk about this arrangement. I might put it into the chat window just quickly. We'll have a limited time just to ask any questions, but if anyone, perhaps we could jump into an award here. Can anyone tell me about the suitability of this arrangement and what sort of concerns we might have in a road, two-lane, two-way, with parking bays and a full width Wombat crossing?
Okay, so I'm just I'm a little bit behind on the chat here. I was just
Sure,
uploading a
mate.
picture of the standard layout for signs there for a raised crossing. What's the difference between a raised crossing and a speed hump or something came in? So really the raised platform has that flat top to be able to be transversible. Raised or speed humps, there's a couple of different profiles of a speed hump, but they generally don't have that flat bit that you could walk over. And sometimes we'd use a raised platform as a speed calming device without the crossing on it, but more often we're trying to make that a place for a pedestrian to cross.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got lots of people popping stuff in. We've got sight distance due to parked cars. We've got that come in quite a bit.
That's perfect. Well, that's the number one. So many awards. Consider yourselves all winners, or was there a first in, best dressed?
Yeah, there was a first in. It's a username. I'll work out who, or Marissa, you can work out who that is, and we will be sending you a prize. But lots of people in there. You got to be quick.
Great work, guys. Cool. And thanks for your involvement there. You are right. So we've got the situation where vehicles parked at these sort of locations hard against the crossing, particularly on the approach, may be blocking sight distance to our path users, our crossing users. And of course, we've got our ability to restrict parking. That's fine. And like a standard Australian standards for parking restrictions might be your 20 meters on the approach and 10 on the departure side. And that's nice. It's a number that you can use, but that may not actually work in every situation where you might have very tight curves in your roadway, etc. Please, if you're considering just parking restrictions, that you do check sight distance for your situation. If you're wondering what sight distance to check, refer to the learning management system in the previous course. But then, of course, we've also got our situation where that's a great reason to use curb extensions. And it's probably one of the primary reasons to use curb extensions. It's enabled better sight distance to somebody set back 1.6 meters from our crossing location. And in urban environments, something that's very dear to every council is it also enables us to get sight distance whilst maximising our parking spaces. So that's fantastic. Let's have a quick look at an example of a curb extension. I'm just going to run through here, and I'm just going to say, can you just do a thumbs up or an unhappy face or whatever other emoji of your choice is. But do we like this arrangement here? What we've got is our traffic lane coming through, our Wombat crossing, and our curb extension. So just give us a thumbs up in the little chat. Yeah, we like this.
Thumbs up or the scary face or the, I was about to do my impression of the emoji, which I will not do.
Please do again. Please
if you're happy with the thumbs up, other emoji. Otherwise, you can do that with your reactions or pop it into the chat if you want.
It's great. So I've seen lots of thumbs up, and that's pretty spot on. I mean, I do like this. There's a couple of issues, a few things I'm not as happy about, but typically it's doing what we wanted it to do. And we've got the curb extensions set back away from the parking area, and it enables somebody standing just 1.6 meters back to be more visible to the approaching motorist. So that's working well. There is something I don't particularly like here, and it may not be a game over, and it may not be strategically invalid for this location. But what I don't like is that you do have this parking bay here hard against the toe of the ramp section. And when a vehicle needs to park at this location, the way they need to do that is they need to approach the ramp, pull up onto the ramp with their left indicator on, and reverse in. And there's a few issues there. And please keep this in mind for your sites as well when you're trying to maximize parking, which is that a vehicle pulling up here with their left indicator on is telling many, many motorists that they're actually turning left. So there's a key issue there. You might find bulking of traffic, pulling up too close, making the maneuver difficult. But then we've also got the concern about somebody pulling up here with their left indicator on, looking very much like they're turning left, and having someone using the crossing itself and realizing that there's a great time to walk around behind them just as they're about to reverse in. So I don't love that arrangement in certain environments, and this might be a very successful project for this site in Carlton, Victoria, where pedestrian volumes are sufficiently low or motorist volumes are sufficiently low that that risk is unlikely, improbable. In high demand environments, just say this was very high pedestrian demand, that would be a key risk to be considering though, because you're almost certain that eventually someone's going to walk around behind a vehicle that's trying to reverse in. So that's a strategic issue. I won't just leave you with the issue there. I'll give you just a bit of advice on what to consider for these environments. That would be, again, 6 meters, a standard sort of passenger vehicle length from our system. Ideally, again, from the ramp toes, they're nice and clear, and it's very clear that they're not about to cross and turn left, that they're actually pulling out prior. And that enables a vehicle to reverse in at this location. And again, even after it, enables a vehicle, if this were a mid-block environment, it enables a vehicle to be past the crossing, pull up clear of the crossing, and enable a vehicle to reverse park into the first available space there again. So around 6 meters is my go-to. Again, there's some other references out there, but I think this is a very functional system for passenger vehicle parking.
And of course,
moving along. Oh yes,
we've got the Top Gun of race crossings attending this course, so their eagle eyes are looking at things at this crossing. A bit of concern about planting and blocking potential sight
absolutely,
signage,
great.
Doing that as well,
yep.
And pointing out sort of keep left signs are big enough to block a child sometimes and the like. So we want to be careful with all of that as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad to see even more involved in this site. And it is true, like one of the perceived benefits of curb extensions is the landscaping opportunities. Don't be shy to make them aesthetic, but please be very aware of what plants you're putting in there and how high they will grow and how they're going to block your sight distances, because that could be achieving the complete opposite of what a curb extension may do for our project.
And an interesting one I don't have an answer to has come in from Michael around, is it a good option to you to put your motorcycle parking in these locations because it's going to block less sight distance? Now, in Victoria, where Jonathan and I are based, there is no motorcycle parking. Motorcycles park wherever they want on the footpath or anything like that. So we're going to scratch our head on that one for a while, and we'll welcome anybody in the chat to pop their thoughts on that in there.
Yeah, and anything such as that has prescribed sizes for parking bays, etc. I guess you could always be aware that you check the sight distances, and if it does meet the sight distance requirements, then perhaps these are opportunities that you could consider for your projects. It's a really, really great issue to bring out, though. I like that. Yeah, great.
And sorry, one more while we're at it. They're coming in thick and fast. You got the 6 meters on the departure side. Is that the questions come in? Why not shorter on that side? Is that around the vehicles coming from the opposite direction?
Yeah, no, it's not. I'll just run through that scenario again. So when we have a vehicle wanting to park in this space, they're sitting up in front of that parking space, ready to reverse in. And sure, some people might sneak in a little bit closer and make that maneuver difficult for them. But when it's in a mid-block scenario, 6 meters on the departure is also useful because it enables a vehicle to prop here whilst they're waiting for somebody else to steal their parking space. That then enables the operation of the crossing to remain clear, and that's a fantastic outcome. If it were a lot closer, you might find that that vehicle needs to wait, partially blocking the crossing while someone else parks. So it's just it's a helpful inclusion for particularly high demand areas. Does that assist, I assume?
That's excellent. Thanks, mate. Keep going.
Right. Okay, let's roll on. So we also have scenarios such as this. And this is where we've got another parking arrangement with our angled parking. I won't bother going through the award question asking. I'll just answer this question for everybody out there and for the universe itself, which is that when you've got your angled parking, we might have some very, very wide crossing distances. So that can have some key issues in operation. Yes, this is a priority crossing. Yes, everyone has to give way to someone using this crossing. But vehicles turning in might see somebody all the way back here and get confused about if they've got the right of way still because they're not stopping the pedestrian from crossing. Pedestrians may bulk with the same issues and slow down for vehicles approaching with the same concerns. So there can be traffic delay issues and confusion. And I'm really not a big fan of confusion in any design solution. I think that designs should be iterative and, sorry, not iterative, should be self-illustrating the requirements for what they need to, for how they need to operate. And there may even be some increased exposure to risks, and particularly that scenario where people are confused about how this needs to operate or who has right of way. So again, we're looking at curb extensions as an excellent solution for that scenario. This may not be drafted perfectly. I mean, you might need a little bit more room for the reverse maneuver again to make it clear of the crossing itself, and that's something again to be aware of. A vehicle length again is the right solution there. But let's just have a talk about how this arrangement needs to work. And this issue also applies to the previous example. But let's just ask ourselves, I mean, what sort of distance now do we want for our crossing? Because this is about reducing crossing distance. So what crossing distance do we want? Sure, we have curb extensions and median islands can affect crossing distances. That's great. But what do we want is the question. We're looking at Austroad's Guide to Traffic Management. I mean, there is lots of references out there for what's desirable. Your jurisdiction may vary, and it's actually a good time now to comment that I'll be showing various values from various guidance. Please refer to your own jurisdictional guidelines and requirements for what may suit your site. It's the principles that we're talking about here, though. So for general crossings, not even necessarily priority crossings, pedestrian or path priority crossings, we've got 8 meters. Is great, and that's good. Then also in Austroad's Guide to Road Design, it says 10 meters, maximum or preferred. Some interesting language is used sometimes in the guides. And these are good values. They're good targets, and that just is about crossing risk and exposure and crossing time, so it's useful. But please don't forget about our on-road cyclists, particularly in the angled parking environments where Australian standards may have certain parking bay widths and certain traffic lane widths for the reverse maneuvers. And the result of those traffic lane widths may be something that's significantly wider than your average 3-point-something meter lane. And it may be 4.5 meters, for instance, may be the traffic lane width, which is more than enough for on-road vehicles and cycling to be sharing that space. And cyclists at the approach may find that curb extensions are a pinch point. So I'll just run through some of the examples of how you may consider maximum widths here. So Austroad's Guide to Road Design then says, wait a second, if you're doing this sort of treatment, whilst we said we want 10 meters max, we actually want sort of, Austroad's traffic management says 8 meters max. We actually want 4.5 meters per lane. That's 9 meters if there's cyclists there that need to share the road. We could also consider the principles of what's called a wide curbside lane. Please have a look at Austroad's Guide to Road Design Part 3 or your own guidance if it differs to that. And that just talks about other values for what may be acceptable width for cyclists and motorists to share that space. And of course, we could also say, no, this is a slow point. So let's slow down everybody. This is now a shared area for cyclists and motorists. They need to self-manage, but effectively do that safely to arrive here in single file. So there's nothing wrong with considering this for the right environment. If there are certain treatments, though, if this were part of a principal bicycle network where on-road cycling is encouraged, I mean, you probably should be thinking about including it in your cross-sectional width, though. So jumping on to examples, so is our lane sharing. That's got the nice pavement marking, encouraging everyone to be aware that cyclists are going to be somewhere in the middle of the road potentially. And then, of course, in our more high demand cycling environments, I don't love that this is arriving at a roundabout, but focusing on the curb extension and Wombat crossing area. If you've got the demand for cyclists is high enough to have a separate on-road cycling lane, then perhaps you might want to continue that width through at these crossing locations. And then, of course, if you have other high-demand cycling environments such as this, you might actually want to send them off-road through these areas to keep it separated. That's particularly useful at roundabouts, and unlike the previous image, I think this is typically a better arrangement for cyclist safety. You can see here, sorry, I just would have loved to have taken this photo a little bit wider, but we've got the ramp from on-road cycling coming up here to a give-way condition for the pedestrian crossing, and then we've got the other separated cycling path going around the outside of the roundabout. So, yes, there's different cycling arrangements. Now, let's jump into a bit of a quiz. We're looking at about 1 hour. So perhaps after this quiz, we'll be thinking about having a little short break.
I think we might mix the break in with it. So you tell
Yes, sure.
what people will be voting on, and then I'm going to give them 5 minutes to vote and stretch and fill up a coffee.
Oh, it sounds perfect, mate.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, just before we take the break, I'd just like to run through which curb extension here do we think is the best arrangement? Is it A? Oh, and my screen's blocking it, so please feel free to move the poll around if it's blocking the images. But we've got A on the left, which is the very tight little curb extensions. We've got B, which is the nice relaxed curb extension. And then we've got C, which is these squared off curb extensions. Or the mysterious, it all depends on the context of the site, which may be a ruse. I may be putting that there to trick you, or it could be the answer. So please, in your own time, respond to that and then take a little stretch, and looking forward to seeing you all shortly.
Back in 4 minutes. So fill that out, and we'll jump back into it in 4 minutes.
Great.
We'll give it another 30 seconds. Give it another 30 seconds just for people to get seated again. We've got the poll has come in. A few people, they're quick off the mark, Jonathan. They were writing answers into the chat before the poll even popped up. So that was good. All right, let's end that poll because we've got everybody there. We're sharing it, and most people went B pretty quick, and then a few jumped in on the all. It depends on the context, and if you like C, but I think we can kick back off, Jonathan, and you can talk us through a little bit of that. Oh, you're on mute there, mate.
There we are. Sorry, everybody. Best to be talking with the mute off. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for your involvement in that quiz. So it seems like a lot of people are really keen on B, and that's great because it is a very, very excellent solution. A few people on C, no one likes A, and that's great to see as well. But unfortunately, only a handful of you are correct when we realise that, if this would just continue to, thank you, that it does depend on the site. So I love B. I'd like to use it a lot. I also like C, but let's have a little understanding of why it depends. I won't leave you with the mysteries there. So why would we consider something like A? And I typically think A is not great. I really don't think it's a great solution. It opens up a lot of issues for parking, too close, etc. In these sort of environments. But of course, the scenarios when it might be useful. And whilst there might be some challenges to introducing movements for, say, a driveway at this location, it might be worthwhile just in the context of getting a right operation. And whilst I've drafted this with lots and lots of obstructions, apparently, sure, the rest of this may be nice and smooth. It might be acceptable just to cut these in a bit earlier in constrained environments. Option B, so what's useful about option B? Lots of people loved it. I love this sort of arrangement too. It helps even just smooth in and slow down vehicles nicely. But one of the key benefits is actually drainage, and it enables water to be shed away from the platform. So sort of catches just on the radii here and flows down, and that might take us back to our existing curb line with existing drainage infrastructure, even potentially a luckily placed side entry pit, something like that, which is rare to find, but it can be used. So these are great because it might simplify drainage whilst also achieving all the benefits of a curb extension. And then if we like B, well, why would we even consider C? I mean, B does it really well. What's C doing And for C, particularly in new roads or major rehabilitation projects, I mean, it's just less pavement. It's great. It works just fine. It is a slow point, so I'm not too worried about vehicles seeing this sharp edge here and slowing down a bit early. That can have some benefits too. But particularly just at that pavement level, I think there's benefits. So I haven't listed every single benefit for each arrangement here. It's just some examples there for you. It's going to pop up our summary slide, which I'll move on quickly from, but I will just have a quick comment on our other topics here, which is that, yeah, it can create a perceived narrowing of lanes, which can help in reducing vehicle speeds, and that can be part of not just improving sight distance, but improving speed conformance and the operation that we want. So that's going to, moving on from curb extensions. Did anyone have any questions there, Ken, or should we just keep this rolling into crossfall and other fantastic design elements?
Yeah, no, we can keep going. There's a few little points in there around some of the specifics and some cases where people have found some are better than others. So I think you're sort of, clarifying that as well. Let's get on to crossfall.
Yeah, great, excellent. So here I'm going to start talking about crossfall, and particularly in terms of site validation. What I'm talking about is it might be a new road, but particularly in existing sites, what's the crossfall that we want, and how does our road crossfall really work for our race safety platform? I might jump past this poll here, Ken, because it's quite a detailed poll, but I guess the questions are what's too steep and what's not steep enough, and what sort of crossfall are we looking for on our site? So just moving into flat crossfall, it's not going to be a long discussion, but what I will say is, yes, road crossfall can be not steep enough. Road crossfall's primary purpose is to remove water from the surface of a road and also assist in turning for super elevated areas of carriageways. But in terms of water, I'm not talking about the platform itself, the race safety platform, but just the road itself might be not steep enough. And that may introduce aquaplaning concerns. This won't be a training course on how to calculate aquaplaning, because that would take hours in itself. But what I will make the comment on is that aquaplaning is where a vehicle can lose control because the water on the surface of the road is too deep. Losing control is not great. The risk of aquaplaning increases during braking, and that a race safety platform is designed to promote braking. So please be aware that we're encouraging braking, and if your crossfall is a little bit too flat, we might actually be having a worsened scenario in terms of aquaplaning potential. For anyone who's interested in understanding a lot more detail about aquaplaning, please have a look at Austroad's Guide to Road Design Part 5A. It's got all the information in there that you need to actually calculate aquaplaning for your site. And just noting that 2.5 to 3% is Austroad's recommendation for, say, an asphalt road, and that this is the range, or steep, but this is our minimums, for where surfaces typically drain adequately to avoid aquaplaning concerns. So that covers off flat crossfall. There's not a lot more to it. Let's now have a look at this image here, which is up in Queensland, I believe. And what we're looking at here is it's a little bit steeper, isn't it? So, and I won't pose the question to you, but I will just ask again the universe about what do we think goes on when there's a steep crossing? And I think the answer is that this crossing here, the crossfall of the road becomes the crossing's longitudinal grade. And paths all around Australia and New Zealand have fairly strict requirements on what's acceptable, what's too steep for this. It doesn't matter if it's a bit flat, it's nice and easy to walk on, but what's too steep? And of course, what I'm saying here is that it could affect particularly our DDA conformance. So that's when there's very, very steep crossfalls, you might actually be getting close to or even exceeding the limits for acceptable DDA performance. I won't leave you in the dark on what that means. I'll just plop it up on the screen. So what we're looking for when we're validating our sites is we don't want our crossfall steeper than 7%. I mean, anyone who's interested or understands road design knows that's pretty rare for a road carriageway, but it is out there. Particularly in our rural environments, you might start to find 7%. And I'll just make the comment right now that don't be naive to this requirement, because whilst our carriageways typically might have, our road traffic lanes might typically have around 3-4% crossfall, or even flatter than 3. Our parking bays, and again, in those older rural environments where it's the old horse and cart road has been upgraded time and time again, some of our roadside parking, and particularly our angled parking bays, may start to become very steep. And I've certainly worked in environments where roadside parking bays are steeper than our maximum grade, and you might need to consider that for your projects. Then we've also got our some other limits. This is all from Australian standards. Feel free to use your own guidance, but is your crossing length greater than 9 meters? Well, yeah, 7's acceptable. Sorry, less than 9 meters, then up to 7% is fine. If it's 9 to 15 meters, then 5% is fine. And again, that might be that's a more typical crossfall that you might find in your projects. So there are restrictions on the acceptable lengths that you're using this crossing for. I'm just going to go through a quick summary of our crossfall requirements here. I won't focus on this much, but I will just say that I've defined some great outcomes, which is 2.5 to 3%, and that's unlikely aquaplaning and within desirable limits for our pedestrian grades. And then I'll also say that we've got our sort of bad down here. So if you're ever out there on site and you're measuring your car parks and you're saying, oh wait, we're at 8% here, then just be aware that that may not suit your environment and that perhaps curb extensions may be required, or even if you weren't planning curb extensions for whatever reason, you might need to do some crossfall correction at the crossing itself to make that grade conforming for DDA requirements. Let's jump into this marvelous picture, and I will just very quickly pose this to you. I won't give you much more than 15 seconds, but can someone tell me what's very wrong with this picture?
All right, any comments on that in the chat? What's wrong? What's wrong with this picture? Okay, it's very flat.
Very flat. I love that.
People pointing out the color and the contrast of the color. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm probably less worried about that. I think our 15 seconds might be up, and it was a bit of a joke because what I think's weird is that they installed all their poles at strange angles. And it's uncommon until you realize that this site isn't really flat, and whoever said that was pretty close, but it's actually really, really steep. And those poles were, of course, installed nice and vertically like they should be. But here we've got a very steep road. So we're going to be talking a little bit about our longitudinal grades and what we're looking for when we're validating our site. What do we want to see to make our project nice and easy? Longitudinal grades, they affect the crossing itself, but they also affect the road. And so what we're talking about there is braking. So yes, vehicles need to brake. And of course, there's design standards for where grades are so steep that it makes braking difficult. So what we're looking for out on site when we're validating our project site is we'd love it to be around 3% or flatter, that's fine. And there are some limits on flat grades, which I'll talk to you shortly, but around 3% is fantastic. And if it's 5% or greater, then we're starting to have issues where it might be difficult to decelerate. And again, we're encouraging people to decelerate, and at crossing locations, we may be requiring people to stop. So if it's steeper than 5, you might have some issues. And of course, then we've also got our acceleration requirements. So it's probably a smaller concern, but there are requirements out there. And in terms of conformance, if you have a site with heavy vehicles, they might be infrequent, and it might even be a 100 millimeters high for very infrequent heavy vehicles, or again, a smaller height platform for a route that carries heavy vehicles such as bus routes, etc. There are requirements there as well. And what we're looking for is 3% max. So we're starting to get a feel already for what we want our slope, our longitudinal grade for our site to be at. And it's around about 3%, maybe up to 5. But of course, these aren't just for the cars going down the road, are they? They're also for our crossing users. And this applies specifically to crossing. So if your raised safety platform is for other purposes, maybe your site might differ in terms of requirements. But our DDA requirements, again, from Australian standards, is we want our paths to ideally be 2.5%. I mean, that is every modernly constructed footpath in Victoria, at least, and all throughout Australia, is trying to target that 2.5%. Many jurisdictions have their own advice that just highlights 2.5%. But Australian standards also give us a little bit of an out here on our 2.5%, and also say, well, if it's asphalt, we'll let it go a little bit steeper so that it drains better. This is referring to footpath crossfalls, but the principles, of course, don't change at a crossing location. So I'd say that gives us our sort of range of what we'd like in terms of crossing operation, because longitudinal grade equals our crossings crossfall. Grades also can be a little too flat, and most of our raised safety platforms are curved. In fact, I'm not aware of any that aren't. And I tried to think of examples of how you do it without curb, and you'll find that they are curbed. In environments where your road is already curbed, it's hopefully working fine. And that means maybe we don't need to worry too much about this. But if you're placing a race safety platform in an uncurbed environment, you're placing a curb in there, then yes, that road might be a bit too flat and you might be ponding water. So here's just a random selection of our minimum grades that we're looking for on our project site. So Austroad says 0.5, and very, very common out there is the 0.3, which is the previous minimum Austroad supported for curb grades. And then we've got our IDM requirements, TMR and entered TA. So feel free to apply your own jurisdictional judgment and guidance to your sites, but there are such things as too flat, and please be aware of that. So again, here's our summary slide. I won't dwell on it too long, but I will just say I've got a range here, and what it is our minimum curb grades and our desirable crossfall for DDA compliance is this general limit of what you're looking for outside. Perhaps your minimums and maximums are you can manage 0% by hand forming inverts and curves, etc., doing some complex drainage solutions, and maybe hit the maximum for DDA conformance. But that's our range that I'm looking for, and that I'm hoping that you'll be looking for when you're validating your sites. Okay, so a little bit of pictorial math for you all. There might be another award here coming up, Ken, so get ready, everybody. But I'd like to give you a bit of maths. So vehicle truck turning, not just any other vehicle, a truck turning plus poor effective crossfall where it's not working with the vehicle equals, anyone going to jump into the chat and win an award here?
Well, Luke was quick with rollover. And
perfect, Luke. Massive win there.
Luke, it's a prize. Naomi came in on the Q&A about the same time. So Naomi.
Double win. Well. Okay, so it's a tiebreaker or a photo finish like many Olympic sports have been recently. So it equals a truck rollover. And as much as I've put a little joke in there, these are very serious incidents and they can result in serious injury or death. There's no safe or comfortable way to roll a truck. And vehicle stability issues are a major consideration in what our site may in the design of race safety platforms, particularly in turning areas. So in this section, I'm just going to run through vehicle stability considerations. And I'm going to look at this picture and say, wow, vehicle stability is complicated. We've got frictions and hinge points and heights of masses, and they might be liquid or fixed. And we've got many, many things involved. And I'm a simple person like every other road designer likes. We are simple and we like to simplify things. And we're saying that looks really complicated. And I know it involves crossfall. Can someone just tell me what crossfall is acceptable? And then I feel good about my design. And that's what road designers have done. And they've said that desirably adverse crossfall, where the tilt of the carriageway is not working with the vehicle, it's working against it. Desirably, we've got 3%. But, actually, we'd like a maximum bad crossfall of 5%. That's what the guys refer to. And that's the typical environment in which I start to say, this is what I'm trying to be less than, is 5% adverse crossfall. And any greater than that, I'm starting to think, I might be in trouble. But this is hard to achieve in a lot of our race safety platforms for infrequent heavy vehicle movements. And hidden away in the depths of the appendices of Austroad's Guide to Road Design Part 4A is additional guidance on very slow turning movements and additional guidance on steeper adverse crossfall. So they start to discuss things up to -7% crossfall. And that's an important thing to consider in designing these race safety platforms, because you'll find 5% is pretty hard to achieve a lot of the time. I'm not encouraging you to consider 7 is great, but you'll start to need to understand what your site means for some of these steeper adverse crossfalls. And if it's steeper than 7%, adverse or in any direction potentially, you have a serious overturning concern to be for your project, and there might need to be managed in other ways. So let's just have a little clarification
on that, Jonathan.
Yes.
They are speed based, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, sorry, I won't. I'll just quickly mention how this table works then. So we've got the speed based and the radius. So how sharp is the vehicle turning? So here you've got a number of radius, and as the radii increase in size, then the vehicle speeds start to change. These speeds are in here, and you can see that the absolute worst scenario says that a truck turning tight might need to be just rolling along at 4 kilometers per hour to be actually not overturn. That's not an outcome that we want to be designing to, but it does particularly highlight that 7% might be, it's basically the limit of what's considered acceptable in Austroad's guidance. Okay, so moving along. Let's just talk about what I mean by adverse crossfall, because it's not just the crossfall of the road, and many of you may be familiar with this, or perhaps no one is. So I'll just chat through what we're actually talking about here. In this situation, this is taken straight out of Austroads. We have 3% crossfall, one way to say, across the whole width of the carriageway here, and this is down a steep hill at 5%. And whilst the vehicle's travelling along this road, it's only really experiencing that 3% crossfall. But as it decides it wants to turn into a side road, it starts to experience some of that 5% as well. And somewhere between that turn from feeling 3% to only feeling 5% is actually a combination of those two, and it's the worst possible combination. And that's described as the vector sum. Some nerdy language in there. Basically, it's the old triangle principles of 3 and 5. The hypotenuse is the worst effective crossfall. So this example is 5.8. It does get a bit confusing, but the thing to keep in mind is that 3% is a very, very common crossfall that we're aiming for in road design, and that it brings back to anyone who studied engineering, harks back to the 3, 4, 5 triangle of our brutal years at university. So here, what I like to think of is 3% is what my typical crossfall is. So if I'm anywhere near 4%, we might have 5%. And 5% is that time to start to be worried about adverse crossfall effects and vehicles overturning. So if you're out there and you're looking at grades around 4% and you're expecting your road to be 3%, then you might have overturning risks for your site. I'm just talking in principle about any road though. So let's start to talk a little bit about how this works for our race safety platform sites. I'm going to use a couple of examples just quickly to illustrate the key concerns here, because in this example where I've got hypothetically 3% one-way crossfall at 2% longitudinal grade, this truck is very happy and it turns around here comfortably, and its worst possible adverse crossfall is 3.6%. So that's working really nicely. I'm happy with that. And this site may have been working well for many, many years. And then when we throw in so this is the same site, so it's sort of zoomed in a little bit there, everybody, but what we're now looking at here is we install a wombat crossing at this location. It's not ideal location for many reasons potentially, but let's say this is the project. This vehicle turning in here now has one wheel at the top of the ramp and one wheel at the bottom of the ramp. And that is the key concern here for vehicle stability. If this is if this is a heavy truck route, then these are key issues you need to consider. Let's have a little look at what that actually means for this vehicle. Well, that means our 1.9 meter wheelbase of the standard truck size from the bottom of the ramp to the top of the ramp, we're now turning our 3.6% crossfall into 8.9, right? And that is a key concern. Anywhere that you are, no matter what this is doing, that 1.9 meter wheelbase bottom to top of a 100 millimeter high ramp, that always increases 5.3%. And 5.5% is our desirable limit already. So these are potential overturning issues no matter where they're placed. 8.9% is more than our 7% absolute max. So that's an issue. And it's significantly more than our 5%. And is this a major problem? I mean, for this site, I'd say probably. I wouldn't be happy looking at this sort of example and saying it's fine. But the truth is that, as I referred to earlier, our overturning issues are extremely complicated, and there's a lot more to it. And only half the vehicle in that example, is going back a few slides, only half the vehicle's affected. So the back wheels are still sitting on pavement potentially. And that might mean that, there's other factors here. We've got wheel pressures and suspension and body rigidity. Is it an articulated vehicle, or is it a rigid 12.5 meter truck? And the different types of loads. I'd say that if you are designing this near regular truck turning movements, or if you have any of these sort of, that looks a bit risky sort of concerns, and I would be certainly not happy with this in an actual design, I'd be saying you can undertake vehicle stability simulations. And there's also a few other things you can do. I won't go into extreme detail in this, but you can relocate your race safety platform, of course, and there's a few tricks you could do for your ramp length to minimize the effects that a vehicle may be having. But I'd highlight this, and we won't be talking about raised intersections in any detail in today's course or on Friday. But heavy truck turning environments are best resolved through other means. So a truck turning occasionally on a race safety platform may not be an issue. If it's part of a major truck route, I'll be thinking about trying to ensure that wheels are aligned to straighter crossing distances for your platform areas. Okay, so let's move along from our heavy vehicle stability section there. And let's just talk a little bit about the road and roadside features. So when we're out there validating our sites, again, there's things to keep an eye out on. We're not just out there with our digital spirit levels saying, oh, the grade is this and our crossfall's that. There's also things that we just need to be very aware of that might cause an issue. And I hope that a key lesson from today is that site validation isn't a Google process. It's a get out there and have a look process.
There's
Yep.
just before you jump into that,
Sure, mate.
so you talked about trucks there. Buses similar in terms of rollout?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, buses, have a rollover concern. I'd say that for low-level buses, it's different. They are certainly something that can be assessed, but some buses are very high as a standard 90-metre semi, so they certainly fall under the category of potentially unstable.
Yeah, I've just been doing some work with my colleague Jamie Robinson on the differences between bus rollover and different truck rollovers, and some of the truck combinations are the highest prone to rollover rather than our standard coaches, but they're certainly up there as well. The other one was just around comments on super elevation interaction with the raised crossing features where it is sort of on that curve and you've got the super and like kind of like that photo you showed from Brisbane earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
That interaction there.
And in terms of actual rollovers, etc., in the context of I mean, absolutely. And I was trying to find, so I'm glad you brought that up. Basically, 7% is risky for any maneuver. And if you are on a very tight curve, that it might require, say, 7% steep crossfall just for the standard movements, then introducing a slow, bumpy movement on 7% could cause some serious instability concerns as well. For general operation, a road steeper than 7%, say it was 7.5 or 8%, a stopped truck might actually start to tilt and roll over. So that's the main concern, really. And that's why 7% is used as the maximum. So be aware of it. But just say it was 5% and you were hitting, and the tyres are hitting the race safety platform, a straight section of road at 5%, it's 100mm high platform, then it should operate okay. Certainly upper limits are 7% for positive or negative crossfall though. Hopefully that assists. I'll just move along though, jumping into our existing road and roadside features. So here's a site, and again, I've got a question mark there, but I won't pose it to you. I'm just going to bring up an idea that maybe you've got a crossing such as this, and yes, we've got a driveway here, and we've got a side road intersection, and this is where our site needs to be, and we want this to work. So when we design it in and we pop in our, this is to Vic Roads, road design notes, Victorian Department of Transport and Planning. So we've got a nice wide 4.5-metre platform and our ramps either side. We realise we've got a few conflicts here. And this is very common in urban environments, is that you're trying to squeeze these things in amongst our roads features. So driveways, they can't be relocated very easily. It would be very difficult to negotiate that. You can do little tricks for potentially reshaping driveways into these ramp areas. But we've also then got a concern about, well, this is now almost in the intersection, and that might have some complex turning issues, not just for heavy vehicles, for any turning movement. So this is a little bit of a clunky location. When you look at it and you say, I want to resolve this, so I want to fix the intersection location. Well, I've got to move it this way. Oh man, there's going to be more in the way of this driveway. I want to solve that, so I'm going to have to move it around. And you find yourself asking these questions a lot for your specific sites when you're out there. And perhaps even in this example, you might be saying, well, actually, God, do I want to put on the other side of the road? Because there's not really any major constraints here. And that might change the network arrangement. So further down the road, how do we get to this now? But be doing your site validation early, so you can be strategic about these things, rather than having it locked in for this location, which might have a lot of compromises. Maybe it'd be great to understand that this could work better. And then another example here. And we're looking at a modified version of that site, and I've added some parking in here. We've got our bus bay here. I really want to avoid curb returns, potentially messing with that. And as I pop in my site, I say to myself, right, that's good. I'm not hitting the bus bay area, and I've solved our parking. I've moved a couple of parking spaces, but this works well, and I'm away from my intersection. So again, potentially another little award moment here, but I may have tricked people even with my discussion. But do we like this solution? Maybe we won't do it. Well, maybe we'll just do a thumbs up, thumbs down. What do we think, guys? Or if anyone can pop into the chat, the key issue, because there is something very wrong with this as well. So I like the thumbs up. Apologies for that. Encouraging the thumbs up. There's some good stuff in there.
Okay, so Ryan and Naomi have popped in some concerns about buses getting into the stop there.
Right, that is
has
the
as well.
exact answer I'm looking for, and that this has great outcomes for the pedestrian use of the crossing itself. A bus can no longer actually enter the bus stop. And I'm bringing this up because this might seem like a cute little example that I've drafted up just to make a random point about positioning of these systems, but this is extremely common in urban environments where there's a bus stop that's near a side road, that's near a crossing location, and we want to make that crossing location safer. Quite often these bus stops aren't much further down the road. They're quite close to the side roads that they're trying to service. And that means that this issue can pop up on your project if you're in an urban environment or even rural. And what the issue is that, yeah, buses cannot actually get into their bus bay anymore. There's strict requirements, at least from Victorian Department of Transport, and I'm sure there would be in your jurisdiction about access to these locations. In Victoria, it would be something along the lines of 15 metres approach taper is required, and this is not providing for that. And for this site, we might even need to do something more like this, which is that we keep our our lower curb return down here. We have to entirely remove the northern curb return. The bus authority may actually be wanting its bus to pull in early so that its wheels can smoothly contact the ramp at the same time and approach and pull into the bus bay area. I've removed some additional parking here, so you might need to consider that in your planning phase. And now, without the curb return, you might even need to remove more parking just for general sight distance to the crossing itself. So please be aware about buses, and not just the buses themselves and the infrastructure, but the operational requirements that you may have for these sites. Let's have a little talk about roadside features now. So here I've got our good side, and I really like it. And it's got our grades and our shared paths, and that should work quite well for when I hypothetically want to put a nice raised crossing in here. Over this side, we've got our 6:1 batters and our 2:1 sharp batters and our footpath. And what I'm thinking is, well, when I put my safety platform crossing, okay, I'm going to put a crossing in here, and I need to get to this footpath. 6:1, very good batter slope for vehicle safety. But 6:1 is 16.7%. And we've already talked about, say, Australian standards version of 7% maximum grades, and many jurisdictions require 5% maximum grades for footpaths. This is a problem. This could be a feasibility issue for our project. You might now need to be considering grading lower and reforming the roadside. There could even be constraints, various bits and pieces, services, etc., that could mean that that is not possible. So let's have a look at a potential regrading of a footpath connection here from a raised safety platform though. So here, just a quick example is you may find yourself grading in at 7% and reconstructing your existing footpath that you hadn't allowed for previously, and even maybe you got to put in a retaining structure because the roadside slopes here are too steep to the property line. And you don't like your retaining wall because that's expensive. So you might also then say, well, actually, no, let's relocate the footpath a bit closer to the carriageway and grade in this steep slope, and then a 7% footpath connection here. And then, yeah, that might work. That's great. But what we've done here, and it's not a major issue, but just keep in mind that our race safety platform project is growing because the roadside has presented some constraints. And in this very specific example that I drafted up, I wanted this to grade in at 7 to a relatively flat platform and then grade back up at, say, 5%. And in this example, it was 10 metres of extra footpath. And people might think that 10 metres of footpath is laughable. It's not a lot of footpath and it doesn't sound like a lot of money. But you do that to both sides of the road, and then it's 20 metres just for this site. And if you're doing 5 sites that all have these sort of issues, well, that's 100 metres. And any construction engineer from a council is saying 100 metres of extra footpath for this delivery project, that is a significant increase in costs.
So just to clarify on that, Jonathan, what the questions come in, why is the nature strip grade an issue? Why couldn't it just drop?
Okay, I'll just reflect back a couple of the slides. I'll just say that if we recall a discussion about cross-sectional grades that can be too steep for pedestrian usage. So when we had to concern about a DDA user using our crossing that's too steep. Well, the exact same issue might occur on your roadside. This our desirable maximum grade for a footpath is 7%. This is 16.7%. And please be aware, I'm glad you brought this up because I'd love this to sink in for everyone today, is that roadside grades can be really painful for our simple crossing project dream. We cannot have this is not acceptable for a DDA compliant footpath connection, and therefore we need to make it shallower. The way to do that would be basically to lower the footpath or to raise the road, and I'd say lower the footpath is most of the time cheaper, although you might find raising the road could actually be the only feasible option. Does that assist in answering the question for you? That they can be too
no,
steep?
you've done well there. And then there's a bit of discussion around sort of other options, potentially like landing to meet the
Yes, absolutely. I'm really glad you bring that up, guys. That shows you're all active and you're in the right space here. That's how you need to solve your project problems, and you might need landings. And in a way, I've almost done that landing scenario in this example here, where I'm grading up at 7%, but I'm still not high enough, and I've got a landing area here that connects back to the path. But you might find your roadside is wide enough that you could have a landing halfway to you could ramp into a landing just between an existing footpath. So this is just an example. Yeah, great to see all these questions coming in though, and comments coming in. Our roadsides aren't just left with roadside grades though, and a little bit of regrading of the roadside. What we also have is, I'll just use this image here of Blackwood, Victoria. This is a bit of an example of some of the cute little things like, oh yeah, there's signs. Well, they actually cost money to relocate, and some signs have specific locations that might be challenging to replace. If you're just say we're putting a crossing at this location, you might need these in the right location. So just be aware of signage relocations. We've also got things like bollards, etc., and then we've got roadside furniture that sometimes is furniture, such as these benches, etc., and even drainage pits that this might be a side entry. So it is a side entry pit that needs to be converted potentially. So again, our little project's growing just from the roadside. So please be aware of those bits and pieces. We've also got. Please be very careful of retaining walls. Sometimes you don't expect them, and then you drive out on site and there's something that could be a real issue for your project. So retaining walls can be a constraint, and of course our trees. And if we go back to our little example here of our relocated crossing, footpath, and we've lowered this, and we're all happy it works, and we look at this and we say, that's great, I missed the tree by 1.5 meters, and everyone's giving people high fives around the office. We're all really happy until the local tree guru says, no, trees aren't just a pole with leaves on them. They've got a whole lot of other things going on underground, and there is root systems, and that we're just digging in our solution down into the root system, the structural root zone of this tree, and it needs to be removed. And that might be a possible solution, is to remove a tree. It has additional cost implications, but it could actually be a feasibility issue depending on the sensitivity of that tree. And again, validating your site is so important because it helps us become aware of these key issues that may occur in our roadside that you may not have been aware of if you weren't out there. And if you're looking at tree removal too late, you might not have time for approvals, even if it was going to be an acceptable outcome. So be aware of your roadsides, everyone. And now I'm going to jump into our next portion, which is our services. Everyone who knows me knows I love services very much. Every project is full of lots of challenges with services, and I like nothing better than a challenge. But I also think that I would love nothing better than there to be no services on my projects ever. So just moving into the types of things we might be looking at. And this is a very real site for me. This is a site that I designed, and this was one of many intersections on this project that looked exactly like this, where the red is existing services dotted chaotically throughout the roadside. And I'm going to run through these for you because the site has it all. We've got our gas services. We've got our electrical services. We've got things like our sewer. That sewer, actually going back, that sewer. So everyone who's out in construction might be familiar with sewers being very deep. In this particular example, this was what was called a pressure sewer, and this was running very shallow. And that was actually a major constraint for this project as well. So don't assume that sewers always run low. We've got our water services as well. And then we've got our drainage. That might even be your own drainage from your own jurisdiction that starts to be a problem for your project. Then we've got pits. and the roadside. So it's not just underground. And then I've got things on the surface, including our poles, etc. So I've got electrical poles and various other bits and pieces. Services are a major cost item potentially. I had to pause so I didn't swear when I realised how many times I've had service issues then. So cost issues, that's impact mitigation concerns. So you might actually have some special requirements. A certain service, such as gas service, might have, well, I say gases, I guess. You might have to encase that with specific requirements. Encased in concrete, some other treatments like that might be required for any works near that service. Not limited to gas, but there may be special requirements to avoid impacts. Relocation of services may incur extremely high costs, including, actually I'll talk about timing shortly. So yeah, potential significant increases in costs for your projects. And additional design treatments, again, might need to be considered. So a curb line that you're planning might actually be an issue for a service, and you might need to consider relocating that curb. That might have pavement construction implications, etc., for your project. So please be aware of services, and that your project may grow significantly just to avoid them or manage them. And then we've got timing issues too, and do not underrate timing issues. Service proving has its own turnarounds based on availability. Service proving is an interesting industry, particularly in the last, I'd say, 24 months, where costs can be pretty wild, and to find the right cost can be pretty high demand. Also got service authority approvals, can take a lot of time, and that may involve just simple policy-based turnarounds of 30 days here and there. And then, of course, service relocation itself takes a long time, potentially. If you're lucky, you could have some fortunate environments where it's very quick, but I've certainly worked on projects where there were lead times up to 12 months. That could throw out your buy this Christmas project to buy next Christmas project. So just do not underrate services and the potential that they may, so their potential to dramatically change your project. So a site such as this, which is looking fantastic, and I'm really happy with it because it is my dream project and there are no services in the site. Well, of course, there is services, and I guess my key point is that these are just from Dial Before You Dig. At the time, it's now Before You Dig Australia, of course. I'm not actually sure where it is in New Zealand, apologies, but there'll be hopefully an authority there that keeps track of all your services as well. And the point I'd like to make here is just for your project, at an absolute minimum, when you're planning, just do a Before You Dig Australia assessment so you can have an understanding of what might be out there. And in a site such as this, I'd then be saying, I actually want to know my Telstra service here. I've got a water service here, and I think that's electrical overhead. But I'd be saying, actually, I want to have these proved now, because service proving gives me certainty that we are walking down a long path of approvals and relocations, or that we are able to avoid the service, and gives us certainty of budget and a range of other things, which may be really important for us. A little bit of an activity jumping into here to keep us all switched on and active, although we are approaching the end of today. So at this site, it's a nice hypothetical. It is actually a project site that I was involved in, but it wasn't for raised crossings. But I've got a few things going on here for a raised crossing at this location, and at this location, I've got my nice 6 metre setback, and the local council has said, hey, we want these to be raised wombat crossings. Can you guys tell me a few concerns I may have in terms of above ground assets and impacts in the chat window, please? Bombard Ken.
Okay, well, here they come, and yeah, we've got about a little under 10 minutes to go because we want to show people the learning management system and those sort of things. So, and I do have a couple of little questions, but here we go. They came in. So we've got the poles, we've got the cable stay,
Right.
and I'm just checking if there's anything else. Tree.
Potentially a tree impact over here. Yeah, that's a good pickup.
And then people wanted to go underground, even though you had said.
Oh, well, that's a great pickup too. If anyone saw these bollards, that's almost an award, because they are. Oh, sorry, it could be an award. Because these bollards here, they're nice colour. They're indicating some key issues for us. I'm really glad to have that discussion, and it's exactly what I was hoping for, which is a broad discussion of what this site may require. And I also wanted to highlight a hidden little issue which somebody did pick up, and I think that is the award-worthy moment, which is that this cable stay may cause us some issues. And that in this scenario, this cable stays at 1.5 meters above this location. Someone that's not suitable for a path crossing. And this is again an example where people might think, oh, you've taken a photo, you've drawn some lines, and you've used this as an illustrative point to bring out some standards. But no, power poles are everywhere and they have cable stays regularly, and cable stays can be major issues for your project. So let's have a look at another example just to reassure you that this is not a solo incident. Here's a great one. This is in Fitzroy North. And at this location, this is where you really want to screw this up. We've got a shared priority crossing here, cyclists using this route, and this cable stay, I'm very confident that, and I wasn't the designer for this project, but I'm very confident the designer for this project was double checking this a lot as they're out there measuring it to make sure that a cyclist here had no risk of them using the path correctly and being effectively clotheslined by the cable stay here. So this is a great example. I'm not going to leave you in the dark about this. I'm not going to say, so worry about your heights. I'm just going to go out there and provide you the information, though, because it'd be a shame to get close and not quite on this issue. So here we have some requirements for pedestrians. This is again from Australian standards. Pedestrians, they have our 1.5 metre path width. There's no additional width beyond that required for acceptable pedestrian usage. So if it was just a wombat crossing, that might be acceptable to scrape in your 1.5 metre path. And our vertical clearance to our cable stays or any other overhead obstruction. That's our 2.5 metres is the vertical clearance that we're looking for. So in my example I used, I had a 1.5 metre high. I mean, I did just pull that number out of a hat, but this is for illustrative purposes, but that would not be acceptable. You were looking for 2.5 metres. Let's just quickly jump in about our cyclists though. So for that example, where we have a shared path or a bicycle priority crossing, you would be very careful at making sure that you have the additional width requirement beyond the path edge. So I would be hoping for a scenario such as the example I used with the shared path crossing, that you'd be getting a 1 metre additional offset to our vertical clearances there. It's a pretty risky scenario, but 0.5 metres absolute minimum is also what you'd be seeking to achieve. And then over here, we've got a bunch of other numbers here, and our 2.2s and our 0.3s, they do just equal 2.5 metres again, though, vertically. So that's what we're looking for. And coming in at a couple of minutes to go there, Ken, are we happy to jump into a learning management system? Because with a bunch of dancing wombats, that's actually the end of day one.
Okay, well, you've done really well there. There's a couple of little things I just wanted to expand.
Yeah, I'd love to answer any questions if we can.
Some questions and the like. Marissa will shortly show people the learning management system and show people where the quiz is, or Jonathan's exam, as we might call it. Marissa will show you shortly. You can download the PDFs of the slides, and that may actually be really helpful for you as you go through that little test, because Jonathan, being the detailed design man he is, does like to put the specifics in those questions. So you might want to be jumping back and forth and reviewing and making sure you've got your head around it. Of course, you can organize a little catch up with Jonathan or myself if you need any assistance there. So one point that came in that Prue brought up, and I thought it was worth just having a little chat about, is on some of these longitudinal grades down where we want to put crossings. Just clarifying, so next session we're going to talk a bit more about that.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, that's great.
Defer a bit of that conversation to that, and Jonathan's going to go into a fair bit of technical detail around longitudinal grades, crossings on longitudinal grades, how we sort of adjust and account for that, and can work those out. I think the principle important that Prue brought up is around us sort of calming speeds if we are worried about vehicles hitting a crossing at speed. So usually the crossing itself does the job because they see it, they know they're going to have to navigate over it, they slow down. But on some of those, there's occasional circumstances where you find vehicle speeds are a bit faster, and we could calm traffic before that. The other question was around, Jonathan, how do you sort of balance? So you talked about services and all of the challenges of services and your enjoyment of those challenges. But
absolutely.
How do you balance? You've got your ideal solution, and then you compromise and change, and because of services, how do you make that call as to where you need to spend the extra money or not? Is it around budgets, or are there certain?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I guess there's a lot of judgment that needs to be applied in engineering, and particularly in road engineering. I feel there's a broader sense of judgment required. For your project, obviously we're putting in a road safety improvement, and our key goal is to make this a road safety improvement with all the benefits of it. If compromising the road safety outcome means you can, so if you completely compromise the road safety outcome, then the project's void in terms of my opinion for a project like this. Balancing, however, the cost of success against the application of a safety improvement, well, that's where the judgment comes in. And if you would say that to impact the service and get the perfect project, we can't build the project anymore. Well, does that mean that that crossing's unsafe for the next decade? I think that's where that judgment needs to come in. Certainly, I've got my own hierarchy of decision making, and it does change based on those initial slides on the budget of a project as well. So, is it a low budget project that we want to get in because of an acknowledged safety issue? Well, let's make that project work as best as possible. And is it a high performing site? Well, perhaps you'd be more willing to relocate services.
Yep, great. Thank you. And a comment had come in there around the pole versus cable stay, and the cable stay being a little less obvious for a pedestrian than the pole. So maybe us heightening our concern around that. So awesome. Okay. Well, we have had quite a few other things. Marissa, why don't you steal the screen while I just mention a few other things to people? So Jonathan does have a whole lot more technical detail to come in our second 2-hour session. However, if there's particular things you really want to ensure that are covered, feel free to shoot an email through or the like. We odds on will be covering it because he's going to cover a heap of stuff, but making sure we do, or we're able to provide you with some info or point you at the right people if you have particular things. Marissa, show us through this learning management system.
Yes, thanks, Ken. And thanks, everyone. That's been such a wonderful, valuable content there. So thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Ken. And thanks, everyone, for your interaction. That's been absolutely fantastic today. So on your screen, you'll be seeing the learning management system. Now, hopefully, you've all had a chance to log on. I think a lot of you have, from what I can see. If you don't happen to have your login details, if that's gone missing from your inbox, or it's hit your spam or anything, please just shout out to me at training at safesystemsolutions.com.au, and I can get your login sorted. But here is the LMS for this course. Just in the welcome tab, we've got your link to the live sessions. So the next session being on Friday. We've got the course agenda here, which has been emailed to you already. And we've got a bit of a group forum here that we've popped in. You're welcome to, a couple of you already popped in your hellos. So thank you. It's a good networking opportunity. If you'd like to pop in your chat or any questions that you might have for the presenters, you're welcome to chat in this forum. The pre-course content that Jonathan and Ken have already referred to today, that's just where we've popped in the link to the HOW module from the Race Crossing Principles course. It is, it's a 2-hour recording, but it is handy as an introduction to the fundamental components of designing race crossings. So we strongly encourage you to watch that one if you haven't as yet. Popping over to module 1. So we've just got, I'll refer you to the module 1 presentation is here. We've got a PDF of all of the slides. And all of those, Jonathan has included all of those summary slides in the presentation. So you're welcome to, so it's just taken a while to load, but you're welcome just to have a look through these slides and refer to those summary slides. Come back to that one, that's just loading, but that is there for you. Okay, your little task for today's module, we've got a quiz. Jonathan has set just 10 questions, not too many, not too hard, 10 multiple choice questions. If you just click on the module 1 quiz, as I've done, an attempt quiz here. We've got just a whole bunch of multiple choice questions, nothing too difficult, shouldn't take you too long. We've left you a little bit of time at the end of the module today, so you should be able to, good timing to get that one done now while all the content is fresh in your mind. And where has that PDF gone? Here it is. And if you need to refer to any of the content from today, once again, the PDF slides are here for you to refer to. Aside from that, we do require 80% pass pass, I can't get my words out, pass mark on the quiz. So we need you to get 8 out of the 10 questions correctly, but you do have 3 attempts if you happen to fail a couple of times, and just get in touch with us if you need some more tries there. But that covers module 1 for today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marissa. And any trouble getting into the learning management system, just get in contact with Marissa. And yeah, I suggest you open up the PDF and have it on the other screen when you're about to do the quiz, just open book type, just to make sure you're referring to that and making sure you get your questions right. If you did happen to not do so well a couple of times, maybe reach out to Marissa and we'll organize a little bit of coaching session. It's really just about bringing you up to speed on some of the fundamental design choices. So log in a little bit early before next session. Make sure you're here because we have an action-packed module 2. Thank you, Jonathan. That worked out beautifully for timing.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you, what is it, on Friday, is it? No.
Hey, yeah, Friday for module 2.
Friday.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot, everyone. My pleasure today.
Thanks.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.